Hey there, I'm Alvalyn Lundgren, and this is Unit 10 of Color for Digital Design, and we're talking about digital color correction. So generally in this, I'm going to be focusing on the application of color theory to edit and color correct, but also a little bit of technique. The thing is that for any one of the topics that I'll present in terms of color editing and correction, there are a number of different ways to do anything. So first, let's just do a quick review about the difference between admixing and optical mixing. Because when you're working digitally in anything, on any device, even in Procreate on a tablet, you're working in an optical mixing environment. So remember that optical fusion, which is also known as optical mixing or optical mixture, is where you have small areas of color and they fuse together in our perception into a new color. This was explored to a great extent in Impressionism and Pointillism. And optical fusion is the basis for anything that you see on your computer display or your device. It's the basis for process printing, for digital printing, and anything involving the digital realm. So right now we're looking at an image that has enough pixels in it that it looks like a smooth continuous tone image, which it is. If we look at the image information itself, and we'll look at pixels, it's 1400, 72 resolution, 671 vertical. This would not be good for printing, but it's great for websites and social media use. So let's look at the optical fusion. And all I'm doing is increasing the scale within the Photoshop window, and we start seeing the image break up into smaller bits of pixels. So you can see all the greens and the browns and the grays. You can see the greens and the yellow greens. See some browns, some little bit of orange or terracotta colors. But you see all the individual pixels. So all these individual pixels work together to fuse optically into a lovely continuous tone image fit for the screen. Admixing is the blending of two or more colors to create a new color, and then you apply them to the surface. Drawing, painting, silk screening, letterpress printing, these are all forms of admixing color. And again, in this diagram, we see that the blend of yellow plus red or magenta is going to yield orange. Green and magenta or red is going to create a gray. Optically mixing color is blending dots, small areas of color, and creating distance, either by reducing the scale of the dots, adding more dots per square inch, or by stepping back from the image. Within Photoshop and Lightroom lies the histogram. And the histogram is an important tool that's going to help us understand what is going on in an image. A histogram is like a bar chart. It's a representation of how data is distributed within an image. Histograms are used in marketing, they're used in statistics, they're used in infographics. So histograms are not exclusive to digital editing. As I mentioned, it's similar to a bar chart, but unlike a bar chart which deals with multiple variables, histograms use only one variable. So your histogram is going to look like this. This is the color version of the Photoshop histogram. And you can see the distribution of the red and the green and the blue, the primaries. And you'll also note where those blend into cyan and yellow and magenta. And then the blend of everything is going to give you kind of a gray. So here's the image that goes along with this particular histogram. So the histogram is up here in the sidebar. And we can see overall that most of the color in this is sort of mid-value to light, and the darks are few and far between, and that's exactly what the histogram is going to show us here. So I've got a grayscale TIFF open. The histogram is up over here, and if you don't see it in your sidebar, you want to go to Window and then just click on Histogram. You can actually pull out, of course. What's going on in here is that it represents, as I said, the pixel data that you see in the image. And if we think about the histogram as a linear chart, a bar chart, this end is 0. So the values over here represent the dark values, and up here is 255. So the histogram actually works in RGB, and the greatest amount you can have, if things are closer to 0 or to the left side of the histogram, they're dark. If they're closer to the right side or 255, they're light. The bulk of the data is over here on the left-hand side. That tells us that this is a low-key image, and we can see that it's mostly dark, and there are a few more luminant white spots, but there's not quite as much pixel data over here. There is a full range, though, from dark to light or black to white. So with this being a grayscale image, this just represents black, white, and a variety of grays. This image being full color, we can see in the histogram between black and white that most of the data, most of the pixels represented, are within the mid-range. Because this is a full color image, the channel is now available to me, and I can pick the red, and so we see that the red channel's here, or I can pick the green, and that's this one, or I can pick the blue, which is this one. And I'll go up here to the hamburger menu and get out of the all channels view. And we can also see it in color. So we can see that the blues dominate here in the lower values, and the greens dominate in the middle values, and then the red hits the lighter values. So the distribution of the RGB combinations is represented in the mid values. Now notice there's nothing over here on the right side, so there is nothing in this image that is fully white, and there are some things that are fairly dark. So here's a high key image, and we can see that the data is higher over here toward the right, or the lighter part of the image. There is very little data over here in the darker areas, and as we look at this, that little bit right there is our darkest value, and we can see that it's not as dark as black. This little warning sign, this little triangle, tells us that there is lack of data in parts of the image. Since the bulk of data is toward the right end of the histogram, this tells us it's a high key image, so the overall value is low. So what about this info panel? Keep an eye here as I switch to different images. That changes. And then we go to the grayscale, and it changes again. The mean is the average luminance or intensity level of the image. It's using a RGB value. In this image, the mean is 166.55. So it's kind of a middle value between 0 and 255. The STD dev is the standard deviation, and the standard deviation tells us how much the intensity values vary. The median is the middle value, or the midpoint of the data in the range. And pixels basically tells us how many pixels are in the image. So this information is going to be different with every image. Now over here, we don't see this unless we actually click into the histogram itself. And so we can click on any point in the histogram, and it's going to tell us what the data is, how dense the pixels are, and what the values are. If we have values between 0 on the left and 255 on the right, the level basically corresponds to the horizontal position in the image. The count is the total number of pixels that share that value. So if we go over here, at level 0, we have 1937 pixels that share that value. And here at level 174, we have 335,410 pixels that share that value. The percentile is all the pixels in the image from 0 to 100%. So if we click here, the percentage is the percentage of pixels that share that value. The histogram is going to give us kind of the inside information into the image. It helps us to understand the key of an image. It helps us understand how much data is in the image, and is this an image that we can really edit and work with well? And it tells us how the data is distributed. So closely related to histogram is info or information. And you can see that it's broken down into RGB and CMYK. And so as I move across the image, that data changes. So if I click on this blue in the image right here, we can see that blue is made up of 66 red, 132 green, and 193 blue. And then we can see that it's 89% cyan, 37% magenta, 5% yellow, and there's no black. The X and Y, of course, tells us that position within the image. So it's a good idea to work both with the histogram and the info panel in order to understand what's going on in your image. And by the way, the histogram is also found in your digital camera. And so you can use the histogram when you shoot with your DSLR to determine the exposure level of your image. And you can make adjustments to your aperture and your speed based on the kind of image that you want to capture. So the histogram in your camera is going to help you determine your settings when you capture an image. So we can use histograms to help us adjust color in an image and edit using levels. So let's take a look at that. So as we open up levels, we see a histogram. This one's showing all RGB blend. There's the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. And that basically is going to tell you how much there is of each of the additive primaries making up the colors in the image. And we see over here that basically the bulk of the pixels in all three channels are sort of in the center and on the low end. So it's fairly dark. And there's not much data over here in the lighter areas. Now sometimes if we're trying to correct for exposure, or if, say, I want to open up some of these shadow areas in here and lighten them for a little more detail so it's not such a high contrast down here, I'd pull in the lighter value and also, and probably wouldn't touch this, but you can see as you pull this to the right, it gets darker. So here is your midtones, and you can adjust the mid values, or you can just pull up one of the primary channels and make that adjustment. When we work with curves, there is also a histogram, so let's see what that's all about. With curves, you can have a little more fine tuning than you can with levels. Levels is kind of a top level 3,000 foot view or approach of making adjustments to values. With channels, you can fine tune because you can add points and make adjustments to the image at various positions within the image. So as I'm playing around with this, you can see how the image starts to change. Too much? Too much? Let's take it back there. So the idea of using channels is that you have much more detailed control over what the colors are doing. But again, notice the histogram that is sitting behind the grid.